to Raising Graceful Children. I'm your host, Brett Glover. Today I'm going to be addressing the topic of how did God make the world? And how do we communicate that to our children? You and I both know that there is many viewpoints upon this topic. There's many that claim that God didn't make the world, that it just happened through evolution. It reminds me of an old joke about an atheist who was walking through the forest. He looks up at the pine trees and he says, "What a great thing that this happened by accident. Isn't it an amazing accident?" He looks at the river and sees a salmon jumping and he says, "What an accident that is. That's an amazing accident, that fish." And he looks at the birds and he says, "What an accident that is as it flies through the sky. What a great accident. All these things came into being through evolution. Isn't that amazing?" he says in his heart. He turns the corner and sees this whopping big bear and he says to himself, "A bear!" He didn't say how amazing that was. He ran, and he ran fast, and he tripped and fell. And as he fell, he hit his head, and he looked up to see this bear coming over the top of him. And he cried out, "Help! God, help!" Everything stopped. The bear stopped in midair. The pine trees stopped. Stopped waving in the wind. The river stopped still. The salmon stopped in midair in a jump. Everything stopped. And he cried out to God, "I'm an atheist. I believed in evolution all my life without you, that you had no role in this creation. I feel hypocritical in asking for help in this point in my life. And I know I can never be a believer because I've invested so much of my life in atheism." He says, "But if I can ask one thing, can you give faith to this bear? Can you convert this bear?" And all of a sudden, the pine tree started to shake. The river started to flow. The fish dived back down into the water. The bear's paws hit the ground and stopped. A smile came on his face, and the bear then lifted his paws up towards the sky. And he said, "Lord, for this food that I'm about to receive, may you make me truly thankful." It's great to laugh. I enjoy a good laugh. I enjoy a good joke. It's one of the pleasures in life. And my kids love to joke. I actually put a manuscript down on paper. I'm a writer, and I wrote a book called Grace v Self-Esteem. And I was told by a friend of mine that if you print off all the pages, put them in a big envelope, and you stamp them and have all the official stuff done, and then you take it up to the post office and get them to stamp the top of the envelope and with the date on it, and that's effectively copyright, that you've got a date and it seals the copyright. And I thought, what a great idea. So I did this. I took my manuscript up to the post office. I had it stamped, had everything done, posted it to myself, and it came in the mail the next day. It so happened that our kids, my son I think, picked it out of the letterbox, this big envelope, massive envelope, almost didn't fit in the letterbox. And he pulls it out and he said, "What's this?" And I told him it was my book. They killed themselves laughing. They said, "Why did you spend so much time working on this book? If it writes itself, why did you just wait for it to come in the mail?" And they were stirring like this for the next day or so about how I'd sent this manuscript away and it's come through the mail. Now I felt a bit silly in this whole process. And they were having such a great laugh at this joke, that how this manuscript would write itself. And in some ways, this is what we believe about creation from an evolution point of view, that a lot of evolutionists are saying that the manuscript's written itself. That all the words that were in that manuscript I had was all lined up, probably hundreds of thousands of words or whatever it is, letters, and then made up into words, just compiled in a manuscript. That'd be a massive book, probably War and Peace 10 times over. But it was a lot of words in a manuscript, and when you look at it, you realise from a logical point of view that manuscript didn't write itself. That I couldn't simply just wait for it in the mail to arrive, that it was already be written. And that's how we look at our world, that our world came into being with a whole lot of knowledge, a whole lot of things in place. And a lot of people look at it and say, it's just come in the mail, that our world has just arrived and it just happens to be here, without seeing the intelligence behind it, without seeing the knowledge, the work, everything behind it. And we know clearly that there is two languages that exist that has nothing to do with humans. These two languages are a sign of intelligence. The Bible says that God spoke the world into existence. He created it through a language. And we know that there is at least two languages. We know that for sure. Galileo, the scientist, that great scientist of the 16th century, said, "Philosophy is written in this grand book, the universe, which stands continually open to our gaze, but the book cannot be understood unless one first learns to comprehend the language and to read the letters in which it is composed. It is written in a language of mathematics, and its characteristics are triangles, circles, and other geometric figures, without which it is humanly impossible to understand a single word of it. Without these, one wanders about in dark labyrinth." We have no way of understanding the universe without mathematics. And this is a language that existed pre-human beings. We discover it. Galileo discovered it and tried to work it out. And we now have discovered it and working it out in the science of physics. So we know that this language exists before human beings. We also know that there is a second language that human beings had no part in. Absolutely none at all. This second language came from the Human Genome Project with Francis Collins, who was the director of that, leading the team in that process. He said this: "For me as a believer, the uncovering of the human genome sequence held additional significance. This book was written in the DNA language by which God spoke life into being. I felt overwhelming sense of awe in surveying this most significant of all biological texts." The fact is, our biology is a language. It's a four characteristic symbol language that forms together in protein language that creates biological cells. This language existed before human beings. It existed as an intelligence. So here we have two forms of intelligent knowledge, two languages, the language of mathematics and the language of DNA. Here we have them side by side, and mankind did not make them. They did not make them up. These are two facts of science, that we have these two languages side by side. We discover them, we don't create them. And we're told in the Bible that God spoke the world into being, that God created the world. And He created us by a spoken word and brought everything into being. This is consistent with our science that we understand. Absolutely consistent. You know, the Bible says in Proverbs 8:22, it says this: "The Lord brought me," talking about wisdom, "forth as the first of His works, before His deeds of old. I was appointed from eternity, from the beginning, before the world began. When there was no oceans, I was given birth. When there was no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled in place. Before the hills, I was given birth. Before He made the earth, or its fields, or any of the dust of the world. I was there when He set the heavens in place." The proverb goes on to say, "Then I," which talks about wisdom, "I was the craftsman at His side," talking about God. "I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing in His whole world and delighting in mankind." Now we've got to ask ourselves, did these two languages just happen by random chance? And the odds are very, very slim. The odds are slim that one of these languages may have happened by chance. It's mind-boggling that one could happen. Very, very slim odds that it might happen by chance. But two languages side by side happening by a simple chance, it's a bit like buying a lottery ticket every day of your life and then winning every single day. It's a bit like that. It's just not going to happen. It's not just going to happen by chance. The idea that everything happened by chance is stupidity. When we look at it, it's absolute stupidity. That these two languages, with so much intellect and so much knowledge that exists, apart from mankind, could come into being. So your mission today is to introduce your kids to this way of thinking. That God spoke everything into being by His languages. And you can start off with your kids when they're young and say that God spoke stuff. By His word, when He spoke, it created. So you introduce your kids from a young age, when they're small, to the simple concepts. So as you're going through, you're talking to them about how God spoke and created the world. And then as you go through, as your kids mature and develop, you talk about the languages of God. That God used mathematics. That God uses DNA language, these two languages. And you can build on the idea that God spoke everything into being. And it's an important one when you're raising kids, because kids have these questions. Where did all this come from? How do we make this stuff? Well, the first step is we've got to help them to see that it's a language. So your mission today, should you accept it, is to tell your kids that God made everything. He spoke it into being. And then as they grow older, you can teach them about the mathematics, the language of mathematics, and teach them about the language of DNA, about how these two languages exist before mankind, and that these are part of a grace gift to mankind, that God brought everything into being. God made our world through His languages, not ours. It is God's work, not our work. It is a gift of grace. So if you can tell your kids this truth and help them to see the world was made by God in His hand, by His languages, it was spoken to being with how He chose to create the world. And it has nothing to do with human beings. We just look on and discover His language. We don't actually write this language new. We don't create it. God has already created it. To answer some of your kids' questions about where did the world come from and how did it come into being, well, this is one step in many that may help you to explain to your children how God created the world. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for watching.